Start the recording, please. Thank you. And yes, can I welcome you all this lunchtime to the revenues and benefits briefing. Going to do this slightly different from the way that we've done for previous months. I shan't be doing a presentation at the end. I'm going to let Laura, because Laura's got quite a few circulars to go through, and Paul's got quite a lot to talk about the Chancellor's autumn statement. But I thought we'd open it up for a discussion after Paul has finished to get some feedback from the rest of you and some general views, if that's all okay with you. Really, it's too bad if it isn't, because that's the way I've set it up. So off we go. Right, so we've got with us today, we've got Laura Bessell. Hi, Laura, from Oxford. As normal, Laura's going to cover off the circulars. And then we have Paul Howarth. Those of you who are old enough to remember him, I have him stuffed and kept up in my attic. And I wheel him out for events like today. Hi, Paul, how are you? We can see you swearing, but we can't hear what you're saying.
I'm muted, so no, I like the very young looking photographs. It's very, very flattering.
Okay, and we also got Nick with us today. So Nick's keeping an eye on the marshalling and stuff like that, and make certain I don't miss anything that is raised. For these sessions, if you've got any questions, we take them at the end. And you can either type those in the Teams sort of box thingy, chat box, that's it. And or you can raise your hand and I'll open the line like we do on the Monday sessions, and you can all join in. So so that's that. And now we'll move straight on to onto the sessions. Laura, I'm going to start with you.
And that is a young picture of me. That's definitely pre-COVID. I'm smiling and I've got long hair and it's not gone dark and horrible. Okay, so if we
Paul's going to say the same, you know.
It's just dreadful. Oh, I must get to the hairdressers out of my shed. Okay, if we can start with the subsidy ones then first of all, please.
We can.
Okay, so I've said that we've got a lot of circulars to talk about. I was actually quite surprised how much I've got to talk about today. So I do promise to be quick because, as I'm sure we're all excited about, Paul's session later and then a chat session. So if we can go on to the next slide then, please, Malcolm. Oh, it's got stuck. Okay, so starting with S10 is the mid-year DHP payments. Now, the DWP have now decided that we've had our first 6 months. We had to do a return to say how much of our expenditure we'd used. If you haven't done that return yet, you have got to the end of this week, in effect, to put it in. An email had actually come out this morning to remind us we've got till the end of the month. For those of you who have already done your return, so we are one of those authorities that have, we have had a letter back to say how much it was. Not very much, I'm not going to lie, despite the fact I'd gone over my 6 months expenditure. So I was a bit disappointed when I saw it. And the payment should come in towards the end of November to finish us up for the rest of the financial year. The circular doesn't really go into about whether it's been a successful idea, this 6 months review, or not. But from my point of view, it definitely is not successful because I think I've actually got less than what I would have liked. S11 is funding for the housing benefit accuracy work. So it's just a circular for those LAs that are joining after the 4th of October. Those ones that went from the 1st of April, you don't need to read it because you know about your allocated funding. But this is just the local authorities that are starting mid-year on this scheme, and it's just what your funding allowance is going to be. Very short tables. There's only about 30 of you on there. Next slide, please. So we're on to adjudication next. Okay, so we've had a couple of circulars on the settled status for the EU citizens that need to sort out with the Home Office their residency permit as such in the UK. So this initial circular on A10 is from back in July, but I am covering it again because, as you'll see in there's a one a bit later on that I need to talk to you about. So they need to have applied on the Home Office portal for settled status. If they've heard and been refused and they appeal, then we're still treating them as if they've got settled status, and we need to diary date going in the future. So this circular is very much about how we deal with that Home Office process. Okay, and the DWP are saying that you need to keep talking to your claimants that haven't met that criteria. So you will have had 2 spreadsheets now that come through, as I call the black box, from the DWP. One was in approximately August time, when the secondary one came in about September time. I'd gone from 14 on my first list and it dropped down to 4 on the second list. So it kind of shows that the DWP are working with the Home Office, making contact with these people to try to do some work. Now, in between times, we also did receive an email which had council tax reduction people that would have been affected, and we had to reply back to the DWP to say that we've deleted this and that we wasn't to use it going forwards. So if you haven't done that, I think you're going to be getting emails from the DWP saying we haven't had your email back to say you've not used that data and that you have deleted it. So if you need to start thinking about applying back to them on those. So settled status is an issue, and we'll talk about that in a minute because we've got an R circular. The A9 talks about the habitually residency issue for the Afghani nationals. So Afghani nationals that came over from that horrendous situation in the Middle East from the 15th of August under the UN humanitarian support, they have amended the regulations from the 15th of September, stating that people of Afghani nationals relating to this situation no longer have to go through the HABRES test. So they're going to be signposted to means tested benefits. So obviously it's universal credit predominantly, unless they're on temporary accommodation. Benefit cap will still apply for those people. That's quite interesting. So I'm assuming there's going to be some DHP requests coming in there in that situation, because I'm not quite sure if they're all going to come over with English as a first language and how they're going to get themselves into employment. They may have other mental health needs and stuff like that. So I think when we look at the habitually residency test, we just need to be mindful that if an Afghani national, what scheme they have come in under. What the circular also says is that if these people are not on a formal scheme, but they have come over from the 15th of August under the principles that they are fleeing violence in their own country, then you still have the rights to exempt them from the habitually residency process. It just means that they haven't been formally picked up under the UN. So, you know, I think we just need to be generous in those situations. Next slide, please. A8 is the domestic abuse support. Okay, so new regulations come in from the 9th of September. And what the regulation does is it removes the spare room subsidy on homes which have been adapted for the sanctuary scheme. So the sanctuary scheme is usually a separate room in the property. It's usually got an alarm on it, where if somebody is suffering from DV, they can go into their sanctuary room. It's a secure locked room if there's obviously violence within the home. And of course, it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be an adult. It could be a child as well. So normally they would have been under the spare room subsidy capping issue, and you'd have been using a DHP from it. Now that the government have changed that and made it mainstream housing benefit award, all I'm saying to you is just to have a think about if you've got any DHPs on those, you can stop paying them from the 1st of October, put them onto normal benefit, and then that obviously reserves your pot for DHP going forwards. And what I've also put in here, because the circular does say there's no changes to the computer systems. However, I think that's a bit slightly short-sighted, because I think you're going to need to put a code in there to say sanctuary scheme or something in your rent cost element, whether in Civica, Academy or Northgate, because I imagine going down the line, Sheeby will want to be reporting on the success of this and how many people are utilising it. So as long as you create the code in the rent code section, you should therefore be able to report it via Sheeby. I think there's one more, isn't there not? Thank you very much. Okay, and so this one, the last one then, is A7, which is the care leavers and homeless amended regs. So as we all know, the shared room rate was there in place if you was a single person under 35 and you were in a property that, you know, you should have been in theory living at home with your parents and you were in a room on your own. If you was a care leaver, you were exempt up to the age of 25. And what they've done is they've amended the care leaver up to the age of 25 now. So it therefore is changing your spare room rate exemptions, because you're going to be exempt for more people. Sorry, more people are going to be exempt, because up to the age of 25 now gives you a further 3 years of which you could have been a care leaver. And at the same time, these people will have a greater period of time to be able to qualify for this exemption. So what I'm saying is you just need to check your databases so to make sure that you apply for that exemption. Again, the circular is saying that these people have to apply for this exemption. And I have to say I'm in disagreement with that, because most care leavers, whether you're on a unitary authority or whether you're in a two-tier authority, you're going to know that they're a care leaver because they're already exempt in there. What we need to do is run ourselves an internal report and make sure that we're applying the correct room rate at any stage. So I'm just saying we just need to think about that going forward. But the circular does say that the care leaver has to ask for it. That's all I'm saying. Next slide, please. Okay, so if we go to the restricted one, so the restricted is R1 only, and I am not allowed to talk about it because the word restricted kind of gives it away. What I would say to you is if you haven't had the restricted email and it would have come in the last 10 days, I know some authorities get them on different days to each other. I don't know why. We need to go back to Diana at the DWP to have that sent out to you. If you haven't got Diana's email address, if you can just put your name into the chat box and I can send you the link to how to speak to Diana. Because we can't talk about it, but it is relating to the EU settled status cases and how you deal with their claims going forward, and it's not able to be in the public domain. So that's what it's about. Next one. Okay, so we've had a couple of claudes in, and I have kind of narrowed them down to the interesting bits, I'm not going to lie. The DWP are going to go back to compliance visits according to Clause 12, so we should be seeing LAIFs again. I can know from my point of view, I'm getting about 2 or 3 a week now, and they all seem to be very demanding, the DWP, if they need to know instantly, of which I'm going, no. But they are starting to go back to those compliance visits. Still no complete mention of fraud investigations. However, I wouldn't be surprised if those fraud officers are doing the compliance, and if it turns into a fraud case, then they will take it on that different route. And also at the same time, we've got a local authority welfare direct 9 came in, and that just discusses the fact that HBMS data sharing is back. Now, I'm not going to lie, I didn't think it had gone anywhere because I was still dealing with them. But apparently HBMS is back. They've reviewed some of the codes and they've had some changes to some pensioner codes. So if you're looking at your HBMS and you can't work out what the new code is, for example, because they haven't sent a new updated list, if you go to Claude 9, you might be able to find out what it means on that one there for you. And we've got Claude 14 as well. So Claude 14 is talking about access for Searchlight. So under the home working arrangements due to COVID-19 and asking us not to go into the office, the DWP gave us a bit of leniency in terms of how we access Searchlight. Okay, we still should be cabled. We still should be on two-factor authentication to get access in. But they have allowed people to have their own personal equipment, for example, as long as they're still doing the authentication process and it's still secure through your council's network. What they've said is that they're going to review the part of the personal devices in April 22. If they decide that they're going to remove that allowance for local authority staff to use personal devices, they're going to give a 6 months notice to remove that discretion. And that's because they're aware that laptops are very expensive and that budgets have got to be changed and it's got to be ordered and probably procured in some cases. So they are going to give us 6 months notice. So we just need to keep an eye on that. But in terms of the rest of that circular, it really is very much talking about the memorandum of understanding. So making sure that your staff haven't got people that walk around, can see over your shoulder looking at DWP records. very things are no different to what we were doing in the office. It's just we need to make sure we've got some robust processes in place from our point of view. And also they've kind of mentioned in the background that you should have a home working policy as well should the DWP need access to it. Well, I'm sure most councils probably got a policy. Whether it's to the DWP standard is another conversation, but they'd like to know that you've got a policy. So they're not asking for you to send it in, they're just saying make sure you've got one.
Can I ask, Laura, has there been an outbreak of children at school discussing these claims at home?
Well, I have to say, right, okay, and I'm obviously conscious that this is recorded, but we did have a situation the other day in our office, where I was talking to somebody in my team, and their other half walked in the office, and I just said, can I ask, have you got our Civica system, because we're on Civica, have you got our Civica system open? And they went, yes. I said, you need to shut that down. Someone's walked in the back, and you just don't know who your other halves work with and all the rest of it. And I'm sure that nobody really is taking that interest, but, you know, they're just coming in with a cup of tea and putting it down. But technically, that person has now seen your screen. And I think we've just got to be careful, because from my point of view, I live in Buckinghamshire. I don't want to keep driving backwards and forwards to Oxford. One of the positives of COVID is that now my senior management understand that home working is a positive for me. And the last thing I want is access to Searchlight means that we've all got to tramp back into the office again. So I think as long as we're just careful on how we manage that, the DWP as well, Malcolm, have been sending emails out saying, are you doing due diligence across your service? Are you doing your spot checking against people and their level of securities and things like that? Are the right people doing it on the audit trail? Should they ever come in and audit us? Now, I'm not going to lie to you, it probably wasn't the highlight of everybody's list to do in the last 18 months. But now that COVID has slightly calmed down a bit, I have sent that back out, and we're doing the DBA checks and all the rest of it to make sure that we're all compliant. But they're definitely thinking about it, and it's definitely hot on their agenda.
Okay. I was just curious, that was all.
I'm curious about my home working policy. Let's not even go there.
Right, okay. So thank you very much.
No, I've got letters left, sorry.
Oh, you've got letters, of course you have.
Yeah, I've got 2 letters. Just the letters are, we've had one from the DWP literally in the last couple of days saying that they've sent us £2,500, and this is to pay for the Scottish Child Disability Premium. Well, the only reason why I found out about it was because my former provider, because I've changed systems this year, Capita had already sent the invoice out before I'd even received the circular. So obviously they were a bit ahead of the game, and I'm saying, what's this £2,500 for? So I hadn't seen it. It's gone to your 151 officers. So if there's any other managers out there that have got a letter from their software provider saying, please pop up, it could well be you've not seen the letter yet because it's in somebody else's mailbox. So I'm just giving you that one. And then the only other thing is we've had a letter last month about the Apollo list. So we need to narrow it down to 10 people per local authority who deal with the phone calls issue. Now, I have to be honest with you, I only needed 2, so I've only sent back 2, to be quite honest. But we should have sent that back to the DWP by the end of September so that people can make calls. If you're not on the list, remember, you're not going to get the information. So you just make sure you need to send it back. And that is me done.
Okay, thank you very much, Laura. Oops, just do that wrong. Oh, I've done it wrong again.
Why do you say at this moment I need to send you such a more up-to-date picture?
So do I.
It's a lovely picture. I'm talking about both of them, obviously. Right, okay, Paul, we're going to go over to you. You've got a few things to discuss. Shall we start with the labour market?
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Yes, we have a fair bit to discuss following yesterday's announcements. So again, we'll try and sort of motor on with this as fast as we can. On the labour market, I think most indicators are reasonably optimistic given the circumstances. But we will come to one issue which I think is of real concern in a minute. But the overall employment rate has increased the unemployment rate has reduced, and inactivity rate is also down. And you can see, well, you won't be able to see those graphs very easily, but what they do show is trends since 2006. And you can see that top one, employment gradually increasing until you get to the pandemic. You can see them now. Malcolm's technology skills are amazing as ever. But you can see that what happened here with employment rates is that they dipped down understandably during the pandemic, but not as far as they have or did during the recession of 2008-9. And now they're sort of edging up again. By the same token, unemployment rates were coming down from a fairly high level, went up understandably during the pandemic, but are now coming down again. So if we move on to the next slide. The underlying indicators are, again, mainly fairly optimistic. Number of payroll employees has gone up, which again is understanding as we've come out of the pandemic, and the total actual weekly hours worked has also gone up. So those trends are really quite positive. I think there's another bullet to come on this. And what we have here is the vacancy rate, and this is what I want to sort of talk about a little bit more, because the number of job vacancies in the last quarter was actually at a record high, has increased by 318,000 from the pre-pandemic level. And you can see that sort of zooming around on the graph on the right hand side. And if you go on to the next slide, Malcolm, you can see some trends here. This is the growth in vacancy rates by different sectors. I won't go into it in great detail, but you can see the lighter blue is the percentage growth since 2020 in vacancies, and the darker blue is the percentage growth over the last quarter. And you can see right at the bottom that transport and storage, which is not surprising in a sense, but the vacancy rate has increased quite markedly over the last quarter. Most of the others have stayed the same over the quarter, but have increased quite substantially over the last 18 months or so. So we have very high vacancy rates, which normally would be a fairly good indicator for the economy, because it will be indicating that businesses are growing, taking on more staff. And that, of course, is true to a degree. But vacancy rates of this level, I think, are really quite worrying. So I think if we move on, I've indicated a few kind of risks that we might have with the labour market stats. I mean, first of all, the buoyancy of some of the figures may need to be amended because obviously furlough came to the end at the end of September, and those the results of that, or the outcome of that, won't be reflected yet in the official figures. And then we've got this shortage of labour, in addition to what we've talked about already. There's a survey from Hayes which says that 80% of UK employers plan to hire staff over the next 12 months, which is quite an amazing figure. So, I mean, how do we cope with that? Do we need some more short-term immigration? Except that that's not the current government's policy. except in very limited circumstances. But it does seem that we're heading for real problems if we don't address that. And also with the labour market, we've still got COVID, and we don't know exactly how that's going to pan out, but there will be certainly factors such as long COVID and the increase in mental illness, which will, I think, affect the labour market. So I think that's it on the labour market. If we now go to the budget.
I've got a quick question for you, Paul, which is, how do you see these affecting sort of like caseload figures and UC migration?
Well, the caseload figures are difficult to predict, really, with this. Obviously, because there are going to be increases in caseload, as we'll come on to when we talk about universal credit, in any case. So it really depends on how it goes. I mean, on the face of it, if there are more vacancies, then people are not, there are people who are unemployed and not being able to find a job, or not being able to fit into they're in the wrong place, or they've got the wrong skills, that sort of thing. That will take some time to address. Whether it will lead to actually more people being in that position, I'm not so sure. I think it will probably be fairly stable.
Okay. What do you want to do next?
On the budget?
Yeah.
Well, anybody who sort of sat and listened to the budget speech was sort of flabbergasted with the amount of spending that was being announced. What seems to have happened is that he had a kind of windfall, 141 billion over 3 years, simply because of better economic forecasts. So the Office for Budget Responsibility was saying that growth was likely to improve over its last forecast, and overall the economy was recovering at a faster rate than previous predictions had shown. So you got this extra money, in a sense. Whether it's real money or not is another matter. But anyway, half of it, roughly 70 billion over 3 years, has gone on increased public spending. Obviously, health and education are the big gainers, but other departments have also gained, although much smaller amounts. I won't go into all the detail of that. I mean, you will have read what you're kind of interested in, but we'll come on to sort of benefits in a minute. And then the national living wage, of course, comes in from the 1st of April next year. So the headline figure for 23-year-olds and above, 891, becomes 950, and of course increases for other rates as well. And the public sector pay freeze has been lifted, but obviously the government is now waiting for pay review bodies to report, so it's not clear what increases might come from that. We'll just have to see on that one, I think. And then for those of you involved in business rates, there's some reform, many saying it wasn't really enough, but some reforms which actually cost 7 billion out of a total budget or total cost of 25 billion. So there are substantial measures, but not quite a radical reform that some people were expecting. So I think we're going on now to benefits.
Change the slide for you. There you go.
So the headline announcement was, of course, the universal credit taper. This is the rate at which benefit is withdrawn as earnings increase. And that has reduced from 63% to 55%, so quite a substantial reduction. What that means, well, one thing is that it brings more people onto universal credit. I think the estimate is about 400,000 more people will come onto universal credit because it'll now that universal credit will cover people with higher earnings, so that they will become eligible for the benefit. And it does cost quite a lot of money, 2 billion in the first year. But if you look at the figures for the later years, it's rising really to almost 3 billion. About 2 million households will gain. I think it's 1.9 million in the Treasury figures. And it will actually start on the 1st of December this year. One thing I meant to put on this is also there's another increase to work allowances for people with families or who have limited capacity for work, and that £500 increase in the work allowance. Now this, for those of you running CTR schemes, this will have implications for CTR, particularly as it's coming in very soon. My understanding is that if you're on the kind of default arrangements for treating universal credit claimants in your CTR scheme, then the most likely outcome is that quite a few of the people affected here will see a reduction in their CTR, but overall they will have a higher income because the increase in universal credit will be more than the reduction in CTR. But it will affect people differently, and there will be some people who will lose out, some people who will lose out more, and some people who will gain more. Then we have well, there was also an announcement about the rollout of universal credit that will be completed by March 2025. And in the spending review, there is also some extra money for DWP to pay for that. So they have gained a bit there. The merger of pension credit and housing benefit, which of course is quite important for local authorities, that's been pushed back even further to April 2025, coinciding with the end of predicted rollout of universal credit now. And this is one of a few little sort of savings measures that have been thrown in to try and pay for some of these other spending measures. Obviously, it doesn't save very much, but it does save tens of millions because the merger of pension credit and housing benefit involves higher take-up. More people will get both benefits under a merger than they would separately. So that cost is no longer going to happen, at least until April 2025. And then we've got the family fund, and these details may not be quite up to date, but this is what it appeared to be just before the budget. Obviously, a lot of these measures were announced before the budget itself. So this will affect some local authorities who will be building these hubs for helping families in certain areas, but it will involve giving more help to support families with complex issues. And of course, it's separate and on top of the household support grant that you've already heard about. So some issues arising from the budget itself.
Can we change slides?
Yes, sorry, yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I just put a few sort of general points here to know what quite the government's angle is. Rishi Sunak was keen on the idea of restraining the scope of government, but at the same time has increased public spending really massively. So I mean, it looks as if he's trying to sort of have his cake and eat it there, and you know, we'll see what happens in future. The other points, I think, on the sort of high wage, skills and productivity agendas, I think the issue there is that it takes time, and this comes back to the vacancy problem. I think most people would support high wages, better skills and better productivity, and there were a lot of measures in the budget that were directed at that. But it's not going to happen overnight, and I think part of the issue here is that some of the problems we now face are real now and will intensify early next year. So you know, I think there is an issue here about how quickly these changes can be made, but also what the effects are going to be on those who are not involved in this directly, those people in the public sector and those particularly on benefits. What is going to happen to them in this new era of exciting investment and productivity and so forth? And I think one other issue is that there does seem to be this kind of growing reliance on discretionary funds to help people who are really struggling. And of course, discretionary funds are never, I mean, can't replace things like the £20 reduction in universal credit. They're there principally to help, you know, those who need that help the most, and they can't fund everybody. But it does seem that we're seeing more and more of this. We've got DHPs, we've got the Household Support Fund, and we have now got, you know, a family fund which will affect some local authorities. And it does seem to be a growing trend away, if you like, of saying, well, you know, we are offering some help to those who need it the most.
Laura's got a question, Paul.
Okay.
Paul, you may want to plead the fifth on this, but can I ask, do you think it's a government agenda to make all these discretionary funds done at a local level? I mean, I know the Localism Act was there for a reason, but when you're looking at all these local fund issues, looking at free school meals, looking at changes to whether people can afford their new gas bills coming out and the new £500 and all the rest of it, we are now as benefit managers going into meetings and saying, what is vulnerable? And that, as we all know, is a hot potato question, because nobody is going to define vulnerability, because some people are going to find it offensive. Some people don't want to clarify it because it could be more money than what the pot allocation is. And I'm just wondering if collectively we think there's an opportunity there for the government to dodge a curveball on a political level and saying, oh, we're giving it to local authorities, let them make the decision.
Yeah, I think that is a fair comment, and I think that's in effect what they've been doing, and what they have been doing with discretionary housing payments, because the issue there is that you know, a number of authorities have not spent their discretionary housing payment budget allocation in full, and you know, politicians have used that to say, well, you know, we've given them the money, but they haven't spent it, and you know, that is a very difficult one to answer, I think. But yes, I mean, I think there is some merit in local authorities being the ones to look at these issues, but because I think, if anything, local authorities are the ones who do know more about people who are struggling in their communities. On the other hand, I think local authorities need more tools in order to identify those people who are likely to be struggling, and particularly need more data sharing. You know, I think if the government was to share more universal credit data with local authorities, they would have a better handle on those who are likely to get into difficulties as well as those who are. Okay, so this is timely because we come on to the spending review, which sets out departmental spending for the 3 years beginning next April. Again, every department was a winner, it seems, from this. And total spending is growing in real terms at 3.8% a year on average. So quite big sums. All departments, as I say, have seen an increase, but although I haven't seen the details of this yet, I'm assuming that departments will have to absorb any pay increases that are given to public sector workers. So, that's something to bear in mind. We touched on this earlier. DWP's administrative budgets have been increased in real terms. Most of that is directed at work programs, more money for work coaches, the various work programs that have been announced, of course, have to be funded, but there is this extra money for the rollout of universal credit as well. Local government, the settlement for local government on the face of it looks reasonably generous in that you've got 1.6 billion of new grant funding for each of the next 3 years, and that's on top of the money that's been allocated for social care reform. So you've got this new funding. The question here is whether that really is enough. We might say that no figure can really be enough in some ways, but my understanding is it takes you sort of reasonably close to where you were, say, about 10 years ago, but doesn't really address the cuts in or doesn't really compensate for the cuts in budgets that took place during the austerity years. In terms of cost of living, I think this is where we have or begin to see some real issues. Benefits have been, of course, outrated, but they've been outrated by the September Consumer Price Index. So that's 3.1%, but most forecasts are from higher than that, certainly next year. And 4.4%, for example, forecast by OBR, and there's some forecasts, worst case scenarios that are worse than that. We've seen, of course, with shortages and bottlenecks that tends to put up prices. There's going to be, we know, some really major increases in fuel prices. Then we have the increase in national insurance next April to pay for health care, and we have tax allowances frozen over the next few years as well. Of course, we've had the end of the £20 universal credit uplift. So taking all that together, the key commentators on this, including Institute of Fiscal Studies, reckon that median earners, I mean, not low earners or high earners particularly, but median earners will find their pre-tax pay just about outpaces inflation. But with these other things coming in, they will actually probably see a reduction in their income of about £180 a year in real terms. So that is the scenario for household budgets, really. If we move on, I'm conscious of time. So yes, we welcome obviously changes to universal credit and the national living wage, but income growth, as we've seen for families, is not likely to increase much and may reduce. And there will be winners as well as losers. The universal credit change is, of course, directed to those in work. So if you take all of this together, then what Resolution Foundation is saying is that the poorest fifth of households will still on average be on average £280 a year worse off overall. Now, difficult to know, what's in this calculation, what's in, we need to look at it perhaps a bit more carefully. But I think what this indicates is that, there's very little in the budget for example, people on universal credit who cannot work, and a lot of those people are going to see the effect of higher inflation than their benefit increases, and all the rest of it that goes with it. So universal credit, is that next?
Universal credit stats, yeah. We've got some questions about the budget stuff as well coming.
Yeah, well, we can just finish. I think there's only 2 more slides.
Yeah, we'll do them at the end.
I just put up, I sort of tended to do this every time now, universal credit statistics. We've seen a reduction, which is understandable, as a lot of people have gone back to work and so on. But the interesting thing here is the number of people on universal credit who are working is now 38.1%, which is higher than the last time we talked about this, where it was 35%. So, the percentage of universal credit claimants in work is increasing, it seems. So, final slide, I think, Malcolm, I just raised some questions that struck me from all of this. I do think we've got issues with the labour market on vacancies. It's quite a dramatic scenario that is being painted, I think. The impact of increased cost of living, I mean, we don't know the implications, and we don't know how far fuel prices are going to increase. We don't know what inflation figures are really going to be like. There are some big questions there, and I think some real concerns, despite some of the good things that there are in the budget, obviously some which will benefit some people. And I think that, I mean, what the Chancellor has relied on are these economic growth assumptions, and I don't think this is going to last as the over the next 3 years. I think we're not going to see so much improvement in economic growth. Obviously, it's a bit of a bonus in a sense post-pandemic at the moment, but that's not going to be sustained. So that's an issue too. And then finally, I mean, I had this one up last time, but levelling up, does it? I mean, it seems to be mainly about infrastructure and things of that sort, which is fine. But does it also mean addressing growing inequalities? Because it seems that the net effect of a lot of the budget is going to mean more inequality.
Yeah, I mean that's a really good point there, Paul. I think, and that's probably leading to some of the questions that are being asked. Nick, do you want to come in with the questions?
Yeah, sure. Naomi's asking, do you think that the increase in minimum wage coupled with the reduction in UC earnings taper rate will incentivise, in quotes, legacy claimants to migrate to UC now that managed migration and the Harrogate pilot have been kicked into the long grass? And that's something that Kim was also thinking of in agreement.
Yeah, I think it will have some effect. I mean, bearing in mind, of course, that this increase in the taper rate doesn't affect people who are currently on tax credits, and there's still quite a lot of those yet to migrate. So if they do get the opportunity to, or if they do look at this in any detail and they work out that they are going to be better off, and there'll be several calculators available that will allow them to do that, then yeah, I think there will be some effect there. It's always very difficult to predict behavioural effects of this sort. Even the Office of Budget Responsibility make it clear that in their costings for the budget, that it's the behavioural effects that are difficult to cost. So I'm not pretending that I've got any better information or skills to do that than them, but I would think that there's bound to be some effect there.
Okay, I can see somebody else has got their hand up at the moment.
It's Kim's got a hand up, Malcolm.
Hi, Kim, do you want to come in?
Hi, Malcolm, Paul, and hello, everybody else.
Okay.
I've just got some thoughts on the levelling up issue connected to the increase in the discretionary funds for the most disadvantaged in our society. Currently, there's an awful lot of, I'm going to use the word hate because I can't think of anything else, or discrimination against the most vulnerable in our society at the moment. And this move to discretionary funds appears to me to be introducing, if you like, a lower class of benefit claimant. And as we're seeing all the benefits of the UC changes being aimed at those in work, those that are unable to work, for instance, those that are disabled, could this mean even more hate crimes against the disabled in our society, and all that will bring with it?
Well, that's a very difficult question, I think, to answer. It could do. I think the government do obviously gearing all the available help to those people who are working, and that is their, that is their key priority. Most of the funding in DWP is going into supporting people into work. But there are, as I understand it, well, looking at those statistics that we showed earlier, on there are 1.3 million people who are not required to work. And that might be because they're sick or disabled, or it might be because they've got caring responsibilities. And these are some of the people who are going to suffer the most as a result of the things we've been talking about. And some of these people will find it very difficult, and I don't think they should be castigated in any way for that. I mean, these people are, it's not as if they've done things or not doing things that they should be doing. It's just a force of circumstances, really, that's put them in this position, I think, very often. So I hope not. I mean, I think it's, I think that would be really awful. But there will be an increase in the difficulties that some of these people will face, certainly.
Okay, thanks, Paul. I mean, that is a difficult, because quite a lot of that's about social policy and the way these things are presented, isn't it? More the economic side. It's a very difficult one to answer. But I get a sense that we're a less tolerant society than we were, than even a short few years ago. I've just got a couple of questions. Maybe Laurie, you might pick this one up as well, and anybody else who's on there. I believe Zoe Charlesworth is possibly on. She may have a view, but are we expecting a lot more churn in the CTR claims as a result of this, do you think?
It's funny enough, I was sitting there looking at that, and as we've pointed out, does the minimum wage increase offset against the universal credit? Are we expecting lots of universal credit changes with the entitlement to come in of our working UC people? And then you sit there because you're already going to get the £20 drop down. Are we going to repeat all the same names again around the December time when the UC changes? I think we are going to get a lot of churn round of data in terms of, in effect, what I would call penny adjustments. There is going to be a change, which is going to be minimal. You're not going to see much of a change between them because they all seem to offset against each other. So the actual, in reality, person having extra pounds in their purse isn't having the impact despite what the press is selling this as. So I think from a benefits point of view, we are going to get a hell of a lot of data in for absolutely no return whatsoever.
Yeah, and can I also return to something that's been a bit of a pet subject on the Monday sessions as well, which is inflation. because inflation wasn't really catered for. And I noticed the IFS and the Resolution Foundation have both sort of flagged up warnings that inflation is likely to rise to such an extent that it will eat up most of the amendment, or most of the benefit changes, and in particular the higher wages. Have either of you got a comment on that?
Well, I think that we're going to see more poverty. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I mean, I think I read an article the other day that fuel prices haven't been as high since 2012. You know, so if you're expecting someone to go to work, they've got to go and put fuel in their car, possibly. Their cost of living, so okay, they've had a minimum wage increase, but actually it's going to be eaten up by just general living expenses, you know, such as putting fuel in your car. So I still think there is going to be a reliance on the likes of food bank. I still think these £500 are going to kick in. And I know I keep harping on back to it, but I do think the furlough scheme, now it's stopped now, that's going to have an impact, because although we might all be rushing out to our town centres and we'll be all right up until Christmas, before he probably shuts us down because of the NHS, I still think we're going to have a problem, definitely in the winter months, January and February, with job losses.
Yeah, and I think we've said, haven't we, on the Monday sessions, that we haven't started to see the impacts of furlough ending, and we're expecting to see that a bit further down the line. You know, it's not quite going to be switched off. So we saw the figures of those people that are attempting to claim haven't particularly risen very high at the end of furlough, but we expect those to turn up. That kind of maps on to what you were saying, Paul, that you expect to see a lot of these changes further down the line.
Yeah, I think I think it's why we always sort of talk about the labour market, in a sense, because I think it is really quite important in this respect. I mean, what the Office of Budget Responsibility are now saying is that, I think I've got the figure right, but don't quote me, is that unemployment, which is currently about 4.4, will peak about 5.2. So they are expecting some increases in unemployment over the next 12 months, but then it will start, you know, as the sort of post-pandemic recovery continues, hopefully, then it will gradually reduce again. So yes, I mean, there are certainly going to be some increases in unemployment, but it depends really on how everything goes. But there will be, all things taken into account, there's likely to be, I think, growing inequalities, and that does concern me, particularly those who are most vulnerable. And I think when it comes to vulnerability, the way I would look at this is those people who, I think vulnerability is really about support. So that if you lack a support network, you don't have people helping you out, or you don't have a family to rely on, the more you lack support, the more vulnerable you become, I think. And that's, you know, that is going to be a feature, I think, over the next year or so.
And I think that kind of comes to the point I'm trying to get to here, which is, to a certain extent, it's not necessarily about the rising caseload that is necessarily going to be the issue for local authorities. You know, the caseload may or may not rise to differing degrees, but it's where it rises and which groups it is rising for, because, you know, as we know, I think most of us would say that, you know, we spend, you know, 80% of our resources on 20% of our customer base, and that's going to be the issue. It's going to be identifying where the resources are going to be required. As those increase, maybe within a you know, a claimant base that doesn't change awfully. Is that right, Laura, or am I just making this up?
No, I think that's right. I think that's right.
And how are local authorities going to prepare for that? You know, I mean, I'd be quite interested to hear if anybody else out there, you know.
So would I be. I mean that, and I mean that genuinely, because that's probably where I was coming from when I was asking Paul about that Localism Act. And whilst I absolutely agree that the government, you know, need to ask local authorities for their input, I think very much we do need a clear steer and direction upon where we are. I mean, I have to say, never has it been more important that you vote locally for the right people, because these people locally are making big decisions now. It's not just central government, it really is devolved power. And where does the money get spent? What is the council priorities? Is it a business? Is it vulnerability? And even from an operational point of view, going back to Paul's point, I've got members of staff who live on their own. If they catch COVID, for 5 days, they've got no food coming in because they haven't got that functionality and that support mechanism. Now, 99% of the time, they're absolutely fine and they're not vulnerable. But something comes in, like the winter bug, they're on their own, it makes a difference. And where is that support network? And where is that responsibility? You know, many times we hear from the DWP, oh, can someone help you fill out your UC claim form? Or the DWP are already pushing back on somebody else help you. And maybe that's just the way I'm feeling. But I'm wondering at what point the government just take the head on there and go, do you know what, let's recruit some people, go out in the communities, work with local authorities and get this resolved.
Yeah, I think you're right, Laura. I'm going to bring this to an end because we've just gone over 1 o'clock and people have meetings and things. I just wanted to just sort of say, I'm really probably more to you, Paul, because like me, you have a long memory. But I don't think I've ever seen a budget quite like this, other than probably back in the Brown Blair days. This was a Labour budget coming from a Tory administration, wasn't it?
Well, you could say it was. Yeah, it was. You know, certainly high spending budget, and also a high tax budget. Although, of course, the tax well, it wasn't in itself, but the tax increases had already been announced either in the earlier budget or during the course of the year. So, you know, it was spend and tax really, which is
and a big government. And a big government budget as well, you know, an expansion on public service in a way, you know, I would find it difficult to see how either the Chancellor or the Prime Minister could claim to be the heirs of Margaret Thatcher anymore. They are the heirs of Gordon Brown, as far as I can see.
Yeah, I don't think they'd take kindly to that. But,
well, there we go. But maybe it highlights that politics aren't going to be split down the old left, right, and maybe it's going to be more horizontal than that. Right. Okay. On that basis, can I thank everybody for coming in and being so attentive? You've all remained here for an extra 4 minutes. I'll send out the slides to everyone. So I'll send out the slide pack, and the recording will go on to our YouTube channel as normal. And for those of you who come along to the Monday sessions, then we'll see you next Monday. Otherwise, thank you all very much and have a good afternoon. And it's almost the weekend. Have a good weekend too.
Hey everyone.
Bye. Bye.